right, listen up.
All right, everybody, welcome once again to the 440th podcast. I'm Tyrant, and with me tonight are once again we have Derk, and with us also joining us tonight for the first time is our newest member, Schnidrman. So we're super glad to have both these guys with us. How you doing, Derk?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. And Schnidrman, how about you?
Real good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, we're thrilled to have you. We thought it would be fun to have these guys on because I think we mentioned on the last one that we have just recently graduated our first IQT graduate. A whole episode about our initial qualification training program, IQT. You can go listen to that one if you want, if you haven't already. And that graduate was, in fact, Schnidrman, and Derk was his instructor pilot, his IP. So we're like, hey, we should really start introducing the guys from the wing and where... other than, of course, me, Derk, and Zeus, who people have already met if they've been listening, we thought where better to start next than with Schnidrman, our newest member. So, first of all, not only welcome to the show, Schnidrman, but welcome to the wing. We are so psyched to have you on board with us.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm real glad to be a part of it, too. It's really something what you guys have here, and I'm really excited about it and trying to keep a level of, just kind of getting in there and getting my feet wet with everybody and trying to stay active. You guys are a pretty active group.
Well, people have probably gathered we're all pretty into it, although, everybody has lives outside of the sim as well. Actually, that's an episode maybe we should do sometime, is how to, that people talk about the work-life balance, but how about the not hobby balance too? I want to talk about that one sometime. But anyway, as always, this show is not sort of strictly scripted, as people will easily have guessed from listening to it. But I thought, I always have a couple things in mind that we might want to talk about, and if the conversation goes elsewhere, that is totally fine by me. But one thing I'm sort of always interested in, really, but especially in your case, Schnidrman, and it might segue nicely into talking a little bit about IQT from the student's perspective, but more generally, I'm interested in sort of your origin story, which is to say, how you got into BMS and maybe flight simming in general, how that led you eventually to the 440th. I don't know, like how did you wind up here? Like, here you are on our show, and what brought you this way?
Well, as far as starting out with Falcon, that went way back to, it was sort of on accident that I purchased the Falcon CD in '98 right after it was released. I'd gotten my first PC, and a lot of the guys I talked to talk about the Amigas and whatnot, and my first computer was a Windows 95. So, learned real quick that Falcon 4 was not going to run on my low-end machine, and pretty much threw the thing on the shelf after got comfortable with takeoff and landings, and that was pretty much it. And then several years down the road, I think it was probably late 90s, I found Allied Force and had a better running machine back then. I think we're up to Windows 98 by then, and could actually run it, and, it was fun, but it took a long time to learn, and you just didn't have time.
Not a lot of YouTubes back then.
Oh, no. And that was really what kind of got me into it later on when I hit about 40 years old, and that's coming up on 6 years ago. I picked up the Falcon 4 Allied Force disc again and started playing around with it, and I thought, man, there's got to be something out there. People have got to have posted something now because we've got all these web forums and stuff. So I started searching around, and I found out that not only were people still playing it, but my goodness, it had gone through like several mods, like the Free Falcon and the Red Falcon and all that other stuff. And now here's this BMS thing, and I got this guy on one of the forums telling me, you really got to try the BMS. You're just not going to be happy with Allied Force. So I think I had an XP computer back then. It wasn't going to run 3.2, so I talked to a buddy of mine and had this old computer that would run it, and I got into BMS, and I flew it solo for a couple of years, and after that, I started seeing all these guys, you know, on the BMS forums talking about their squads, and thought, that's something I really feel like I ought to get into. So I joined a group back about 3 or 4 years ago, and they weren't very structured, but we had a lot of fun. So that was probably a good fit for me at the time, because I'm nowhere at the level back then that I am now, but we had our thing for a couple of years, and guys started dropping out due to real life. So I started looking for some other things and joined another squadron. And long story short, they kind of switched over to DCS after the F-18 was released, which is pretty similar to what brought the 40th all around. And I actually got a hold of a guy at the first that you guys all know, Mr. Demo, and asked him, you know, are you guys really going DCS? And he confirmed that to me and said, but if you still want to fly Falcon, there's a new group of guys that's an offshoot from us, and, you know, the 440th is where I would fly if I still wanted to fly Falcon. So I got a hold of Zeus over there, and he invited me out for a Friday night flight or something I think you guys had going on. That turned out interesting at the end, but that's how I ended up with you guys.
Yeah, first flight with us was just a pickup flight, just a generic pickup flight before we even had IQT program started.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I mean, you know, it's great that, first of all, thanks to Demo for doing that, and I would say that we would definitely return the endorsement. You know, if BMS is not your thing and you want to fly DCS, you cannot find a better group of people to fly with than the first VFW. So, you know, we would absolutely wholeheartedly give the same endorsement the other way. We certainly appreciate him sending you our way. I'm kind of curious, though, to go back a little bit in that story to, you know, you said you sort of came across the original Falcon almost by accident. Was, you know, flight simming or jets or, you know, anything about aviation something that you were interested in, or you just came across it and became interested in it as a result of finding that disc, or how did you get into simming in general?
As far as aircraft is concerned, that's always been my thing. You know, as a kid, we had an air base pretty close to home, and, you know, A-10s, C-130s, that's what I was seeing flying over as a kid, and every once in a while some T-38s and stuff. The base actually closed down several years ago, and it's a railroad hub. But one fond memory I have there was a guy who grew up down the street from me, and his dad was actually my scoutmaster in Boy Scouts. And he was older than me by enough that I didn't really know him, but he was able to fly in for an air show at that air base. It was Richards Bauer in Kansas City, and this was probably about 1990. I was a scrappy little 18-year-old, and I stayed and I talked to him after the air show, and I'll tell you right now, growing up as a kid, I always thought the F-15 was it, but Mr. Hinton, he flew F-16s, and at the end of the air show, when everybody kind of filtered out of there, he let me sit in his cockpit, and I'll tell you what, I've been glued to the F-16 ever since, and that's probably one of the reasons why DCS doesn't really appeal to me, because I've always been partial to the Viper, and, you know, I don't think BMS can be topped, in my opinion, but yeah, airplanes have always been something I've been interested in. I have a friend with a Cessna 180 who lets me go up with him and occasionally fly his airplane. Pardon me. And I try to hit every air show that I can around here. We do have Whiteman Air Force Base, which is just 50 miles from my house, where they have the home of the B-2, and they also have a squadron of A-10s there. And every 2 years they have an air show, and I have a lot of pictures that I'll probably be sharing on the website soon.
Cool. Yeah, looking forward to seeing those. Yeah, so it's funny. It's funny how the aviation bug bites different people. But it does seem to be a thing with a lot of the guys that, you know, you ask them, how long have you been interested in jets, and their answer is basically forever. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, and I kind of took the long route there, but as far as flight sims, I just, like I said, it was an accident. I just got a new computer. I was looking for something to play on it. I think the computer came with a game called Myst, which had really nice, screen pictures and everything, but there was no movement to it. So I was just out looking for something, and, as soon as I saw a Falcon on the shelf, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta have that. And I picked it up in this big heavy box. I'm like, what could be in here that's so heavy? And, get home, and the manual dumps out, and I'm like, oh Lord.
Yeah, I remember telling people, they're like, oh, you have conversations with people, and they're like, oh yeah, well, what are you into? Oh yeah, flight sims. Oh, how's that? And I said, well, it's not for everybody. It's got, at the time, this was back in the day when you read the Falcon manual, and then you also read like some of the docs that I forget which group it was, because Falcon is such a. So I'm in software. It's my day job, and from a software perspective, Falcon has an utterly fascinating history. I think there's very few other pieces of software that have as varied and interesting and crazy a history as Falcon, with all the various branches and going into the dustbin but getting rescued at the last second, and retaining a vibrant community. Anyway, I tell people, yeah, well, it's not like most games, if you even consider it a game, which of course many don't. For one thing, there's at least 2 700-page manuals that are more or less required reading, and that's usually where the conversation would end. But but for a lot of us, that was just the thing. So like I said, we're super glad, Schnidrman, that you did find your way to us. Thrilled to have you. It sounded like you, having talked to Derk a little bit, it sounded like you didn't have any trouble with IQT. We talked a lot about the program and how, we're happy to accept pilots of basically all ability levels. But, it seemed like you had a fair amount of experience and didn't have too much trouble making your way through the program. But I wonder if we could turn for a little bit to what IQT was like for you, any interesting moments, your general perception of the program, whether there was anything that you were especially glad to have done there. And then, of course, we're always, like, I think this is a thing about people that want to fly at the kind of the level that we aspire to, which is we're always looking for feedback. So I'm sure I feel confident in speaking for Derk that we would love to hear any feedback on how IQT could be better in your opinion. So start anywhere with any of that. We just love to hear what you have to say about it.
Well, the IQT was great for me because, one, just learning new stuff on this sim, and the amount of time that most of us have put into it, the fact that we still pick up things, I mean, isn't that great that you learn something new on something you've been playing 5 or 6 years? I mean, where else do you get that?
Yeah.
And then, as far as, IQT, I don't know that anybody actually well, I'm sure some guys whip right through it and master all the things, but those guys have probably flown similar programs before. So, IQT is tough, but it's also built to where you don't have to be an expert coming out of it. And that was one of the things that was kind of stressed to me. It's like, it's okay to make mistakes, but as long as you're learning and you show that you have it down, The big thing is getting the SOPs and being on the same page with everybody. And there's a lot of reading material, but it's not all that daunting. I mean, 36 pages for an SOP and roughly 100 pages for a training manual. You don't have to read it all in one night, and it really helps to actually take time to read it over and over again a few times, and it's condensed down enough to where you can do that. A lot of references go back to the BMS manuals, so they're cutting out a lot of stuff out of the manuals, and they make it where you still have to spend some time with it, but you don't have to take a month off work to do it.
Yeah, so I know that from being behind the scenes that Derk and Zeus, and especially Derk, frankly, put a lot of time into the into the SOPs. And, we do, actually, Derk, maybe we should talk about that a lot. I'm not sure we've actually spent any time on the show yet discussing the SOPs, our standard operating procedures, why we have them, what their purpose is, and how you kind of came up with them. Maybe now would be a good time to just spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about that.
Yeah, it's a different document all in itself. It's nothing extracted exactly from the BMS or from IQT. All three of them enhance each other. It's more streamlined on our particular procedures, steps on things we do on takeoff, departures, the sequence of things we do routinely in and out. The IQT manual will teach all the basics of the different engagements we do, the air-to-air, the air-to-ground, stuff like that. The manuals are needed to get the details of the cockpit itself, but how do we operate towards each other to know, what's coming up and what we're going to do? That's the objective of the SOPs, and they're not too bad. That seems to be quite a lot of reading when you first get into it, because it's something you haven't read before in a BMS manual or any other kind of, it's not a flight type of thing. So it's a lot of new stuff, like, when do we do a check-in here and check-in there, different frequencies that we use, standardized stuff. But typically after about 2 to 3 flights, things start aligning and clicking, and it's like, oh, we're doing this the same way we did before, and that becomes our standards. And that's pretty much what the manual is to guide that.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with the SOPs is that, like you say, when you say it's 100 pages, it sounds like a lot, but on any given flight, it's not like I get everything absolutely right every time, right? Like, especially if I hadn't flown in a week or two, I might omit or miss a particular standard at one point or another. We'll debrief that afterwards and say, hey, when you called this, you should have called this. But it's amazing how easy it is to kind of absorb all that. Like, oh yeah, right, we're going to call, at fence in, here's how I respond. Or when someone calls for ops check, here's what I do, right? Like, that stuff comes, as you say, pretty quickly. And I think, too, it's important to note that the reason we have these, right, the reason that you spent so much time developing this doc and the reason that it's part of IQT is it's really all about, it comes back to how do we have fun together, right? Like, how do we fly in a reasonably realistic way, right? And how do we ease communication so that when you have 8 or 12 guys on the comms that only one person is talking at a time and communicating the maximum amount of information in the minimum amount of time, compress that information flow down to the minimum possible to make us able to succeed at the missions. And that's right. That's why we have that stuff. That's why it exists.
And to keep things coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be a guy on the other side of the world that flies BMS with his group, and then I fly over here on the North American side at my time frame, and then months may go by, and we cross each other's paths, and we're in a flight together. But we both know to do the same thing because our SOPs are standardized. I remember one thing on just with the SOP stuff and those procedures that we use in and out on the last IQT 6. I try to encourage the cadets to lead it so that they have an opportunity to lead once. And so I kind of encouraged Schnidrman to take it on. It was quite a task because there's a lot of new things that he was having to learn to do, pop-up stuff and lofting things. So there was a lot that he picked up on. I think he took a little extra study time, but he agreed to take the lead spot on it. And I thought, well, I'll help him out a little bit, and I'll go take our SOP procedures and other things. And I wrote out like bullet points for him, and I thought I'll just be a real quick little sheet for bullet points. It ended up being a 3-page document I sent to him.
And I appreciate that too.
Yeah, and actually Demo used to do things like that back at the first, where he would say, okay, at this point in the flight we're going to do this, at this point we're going to do this. And again, when we say it like that, it sounds like a lot, but actually it's surprising how few flights it takes before that stuff becomes second nature and really is very helpful. Something I was going to say. Yeah, anyway, so do you guys have any stories to share from IQT? Did anything sort of interesting I mean, hopefully it was smooth, but, like I shared a story on one of our episodes where I talked about nearly shooting down Zeus during IQT 3. I don't know if you guys had any memorable moments from your flights.
Well, I had kind of a revelation, I guess, nothing in particular. I mean, but just, like I said before, you kind of learn things as you go, or you learn something new. The buddy lasing, which by the way was a blast. I've used laser guided bombs before, but the whole idea of sitting outside the threat ring and just pointing the laser and having some guy come in and throw his bombs at him and be able to make a quick egress so that, he's not hanging around in the fire and you're out in a safe zone, and it's a beautiful thing. And I was doing it for Derk and Zeus, who had joined us for that flight, and at one point I had a cloud strip me of my lock that I had with the targeting pod, and I thought, well, that bomb will fly off if I try to catch the same target again. So there was a moving convoy, and I just went back in line about 2 or 3 rows and picked up that group there, where they would be, for the lapse of time where I lost the lock, I kind of figured that's the point where the bomb's probably still tracking. And I mean, that bomb hit solid on there, and I'd never switched targets with a laser before and got a hit, but that was pretty cool, I thought. And I learned you could do it. I didn't know you could do that before.
Yeah, that's cool. One of the things that I really enjoyed when we were flying together was learning how to do some of the forward air controller stuff, and that's something we haven't started. I mean, there's guys that know how to do it at the 440th. We haven't instituted any training around it yet, but that reminds me a lot of that, where you have the FAC up and directing in targets, and sometimes we'll use buddy lasing for that. And like you say, it's a lot of fun when you start to be able to see the capabilities of the targeting pod, and just how versatile I think the LGBs can really be.
Well, not only that, but the teamwork aspect there. And that's something that you get with the multiplayer environment. You can't do it with the AI. And that's something I've really enjoyed here, is just, one, you guys are always trying to help out with something, no matter who it is. And another thing, too, is just like during my IQT, Derk had a vacation scheduled, and Zeus jumped in and flew, was it 4 with me at the bombing range?
Yep, 4.
So I actually got to fly with 2 IPs for my IQT training, which is a little bit not standard, but just kind of a credit to how you guys work together, or I guess I should say we now, since I'm a part of the group. But yeah, that's kind of a credit to the 440th and just the way everybody comes together and helps out.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm going to pause here real quick, guys. Hey, sorry, my wife came in and wanted to ask me a question. That's actually, as I mentioned earlier, we may want to do a show sometime on how to balance, real world obligations and
Right on.
My favorite story, I think, about this stuff, and actually maybe I'll leave this in now, is I was flying one time with Turtle Fur, whom Derk will remember. He's still with the First. Great guy. Good pilot, too. And I was flying with him one time. We were on approach, and I was off his wing. And he's solid, man. I mean, like, my formation still needs work, I think. That's one of my areas that I always continually strive to get better at. But, Turtle is always super solid. And so I'm flying off his wing, and all of a sudden he goes veering off. And this is really unusual for Turtle Fur, right? Like, usually that guy is a rock, and, you can fall him right in and everything. And so I didn't say anything at the time, because, everybody has their off nights or whatever. But on the debrief, of course, I said, well, on the approach, your formation broke down a little bit. What was up with that? And he's like, oh yeah, my 3-year-old came in and jumped on my arm that was holding the stick. Right? And so of course he completely lost control of the aircraft, and he had to go off comms and shake this kid off his arm. So, I love that. It's, we do of course try very hard to fly to our best ability, but it is still a hobby, and it is still for fun, and I don't know, stuff like that is just so memorable and so, so classic. Good stuff. So I'm curious, Schnidrman, and actually, I'm going to go to Derk before I forget, because Derk, I'm curious to hear your side of things. I mean, I think your IQT went very smoothly, which is pretty typical. Most of the time, we don't have students almost shooting down their instructor pilots or whatever. All things do happen. But is there anything from IQT that you did with Schnidrman that you'd like to share, Derk? All right. Well, Derk seems to be having some mic problems, so we'll just come back to him. And that's okay, because I had another question I wanted to ask you, Schnidrman, which is, you did IQT, and it sounds like you actually had an opportunity to fly with us a little bit before IQT even started, but what has your transition out of IQT been like, so when you finished IQT and then you've had a chance to do a few wing flights since then, and I think even during IQT, but maybe you could just sort of talk about how, coming out of IQT, your transition into the wing flights has been.
Well, it was pretty seamless. I mean, like you said, I was picking up some of the pickup flights during the IQT training, and they did a good job keeping me into the right kind of flight for the package, so if I hadn't made it past 4 yet, they were keeping me on air-to-air stuff since that's what we'd been working on. And when we moved into the last 3 phases of IQT and was doing the groundwork, I was able to do some seed strikes and stuff and work my way up to some bombs and things like that. So just, once I got accepted into the T-22nd after passing the course, I went straight into flying. And that's pretty much how it is here. I mean, once you're in, you jump in and, like I said, there's a lot of flights going on. There's a European side that goes on, during their peak hours or whatnot. So it's like, if you want to fly sometime during the week, it's not hard to find a flight here. So I think the first weekend after IQT graduation for me, I flew Saturday and Sunday and then picked up a flight in the middle of the week and got in on Friday. So, I mean, you do all that work to get there and you don't want to let it go stale. So for me, it was just jump right in with both feet and, keep the ball rolling.
Got a couple mission flights in before you finished IQT also.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Derk,
good to have you back.
Yeah, it sounds like you sorted your mic issues. Did you have anything, we'll go back to the earlier question, if you had anything from IQT that you thought was notable or worth mentioning?
Yeah, we'll try it one more time. Hopefully it's working. Just cut me out if it don't.
You're good.
Well, one of the things, I did a quick little test ride with Schnidrman when he came in and we, see just a quick flight around the pattern, check and see how he was with comms, just to check everything, make sure the connection's working pretty good. Seemed like he had a pretty good handle of the jet, so I'm like, let's try to put IQT1 and IQT2 together. And it seemed to work out pretty good. So we actually went up and did air-to-air engagement and did some tack turns, formation flying all at the same time. Along the way then, we continued to do some more tack turns just to kind of add them in. So those are one of the things where tack turns are really handy in engagements when you can make a real quick call. Both guys turn the same way at the same time, roll back out, and you're both standing off at the enemy together in a coordinated flight. So that's very handy to learn those. They're just, you got to routinely do them over and over to get them down. And it's one thing we work on the whole way through IQT. And once in a while, even afterwards, we'll do it as a filler in between. So that's probably the thing that was what we had to work on the most throughout the whole thing. But other than that, it's amazed me with how hard he put into effort with the studying, because when we would first talk about something, I wasn't too sure about certain things here and there, but he would read the manual, always had great questions. And when he came in, he was well prepared. Everybody has a level where it's, they know how to do it, but just didn't perform quite right. But he knew pretty much how to do it. It's just a matter of practicing it over and over, which you can't get in IQT, but he put a lot of work in. So that's probably the biggest thing that I know, that was pointed out with Schnidrman. He did put a lot of work into it, and it paid off. I picked up on the hard work that he was putting into it and the things that he was learning and where he had gotten to, certain stages he was at. So we got to, I think it was probably IQT 3, and I was looking for other flights, and it's like, come on, let's go fly. And I think it was 2 or 3 mission flights, so we actually jumped in and flew together in on those while we're still going through IQT. But since it was air-to-air stuff, it was something we didn't have to deal with. But we actually, I think we did laser bombing on the one night before we even got to IQT 6, where the laser bombing's at. But he did a really good job all the way through it.
Well, cool. Yeah, and I think I'm pretty sure we have I think at least 3 other students in IQT right now, but I'm almost positive, Schnidrman, it was you. I jumped in on your IQT flight with you, right?
Yeah.
IQT 3, right?
Came in on 3, yes.
Yeah. Right. And
that's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got
put
to
him
see
out
the
there
same
and let
thing.
him lead.
Yeah.
I had him lead the engagement. He took you in on the engagement.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Worked out pretty good.
Yeah, super fun. Yeah. So this is something I wanted to maybe mention. So I gotta say, I have the worst time, and I think I'm just deficient here, spelling your call sign, Schnidrman. It's slightly unusual spelling, or I don't know, maybe it's just not obvious to me. But I think we've been working on him to maybe pick a new one, right? Nothing wrong with his, but we've been.
Well, he has it. It's
Yeah?
just a matter of getting him to use it.
All right, so should we put the arm on him here on the air? To maybe
Put it out there because
Okay.
it is easier to say, and I've been called a lot of names, so I'll go by just about anything these days.
All right, so what's the
I've
new
been
call
calling
sign? Okay, good.
I've been calling him Twister lately.
All right, so what's the story behind that, if anything?
I'll let Derk tell that one. I've been pretty active here, so.
Well, it was the first flight that he was with us, and he was flying along with Zeus. And typically, first flight, you want to kind of put in your good show and be there for the whole thing. You take off, do all the engagements, come back, land, and be together as a group. The last thing you want to have to do is to disconnect or have something come up where you have to leave. So you always try to make sure you got everything coordinated. But about halfway through, or a little bit past the halfway point, he had to do a kind of a forced disconnect and back out, but it was kind of understood because he was getting tornado warnings in the area. So here we finished up our flight, but he's hiding in some shelter in his backyard basement or something. Fortunately, all turned out okay. You made it through all right.
That is a really, really excellent excuse. Much better than, man, I really had to go to the bathroom. I gotta, jump out of the flight or whatever. No, Twister's a great name, I think, and I tell you what, I like it because one of the flights that I just remembered that we did, Schneiderman and I did, was on a Sunday morning. I was free, he was free. He wasn't through IQ2 yet, but I had talked to Derk. I knew that there was no. We always like to check with the IP when we're working with new people to say, hey, do you mind if I go fly a thing with your student? IP almost always says sure. They might say something like, hey, if you can work on X, that's a thing that they've been working on, whatever. Derk's like, he's good. And so we got together and I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I don't care. And I said, well, I don't have a whole lot of time. How about if we just dogfight? It's actually not something we do very much. And I remember, Schneiderman has this move that he pulled on me like 4 times. Where, he would manage, when we got real slow in the scissors, he would manage to reverse on me, and it was from where I was in the chase, it looked almost like he was like yawing the jet around, you know what I mean? Like almost like right. I mean, obviously that's not happening, but like the way it looked was like that. And so when I heard his alternative name was Twister, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what that looked like, So I think it's a good nickname. I would encourage you to use it. Not that there's anything wrong with your current one, but I don't know, I like Twister. Yeah, good stuff. And go ahead. I should say also that as far as call signs go, I know there's a tradition in the real life military that call signs are often given rather than chosen. We do actually. People do choose their own call signs at the 440. It's not something that's ever forced on someone. Although at the first there was a tradition that you could wind up with a secondary call sign that occasionally people would refer to you by, whether you liked it or not, So, maybe I'll tell a little. So there I was, story myself. I picked up a couple. I picked up one which was Al Roker, because I had written, WeatherGen and then later, VMT, right? So the weather generating apps, so they would occasionally call me Al Roker. But the other one was, we were coming back from a mission and parking at, Gioia del Colla, in Italy. If anybody knows the airbase, the parking spaces there are pretty tight, and I still to this day don't think this was actually my fault. But as I was pulling up, I was the last guy out of 8 to park. All 8 jets exploded. I mean, boom, 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 boom. And so, finger pointing started in a good-natured way, though, right? And they're
well,
like,
it was a chain reaction. We could see who killed who, and we were all in line to each other.
well, except it was.
It started with you.
It didn't though. I mean, I don't want to I'm not going to really I know how it goes when the harder you defend yourself, the more guilty you seem. But anyway, but yes, there was some of that going, oh, Tyrant started the whole thing. He blew up Thumper blew up Derk blew up Demo, whatever. And so I'm laughing at this because, of course, what are you going to do, right? It's all for fun. And I don't know if you've ever seen the scene in that movie, Top Secret. But there's a scene in this movie where, it's sort of set in World War II, and the Germans are chasing some French resistance guys. And so they're screaming along, and they can see they're about to run into another car. And they zoom in on the back of this car, and it says Pinto, right? You guys remember the scene now? It says Pinto. And so, of course, the Pinto, the Ford Pinto, right? I'm right about that. It's a Ford, right?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, so the Ford Pinto had this reputation back in the day of catching fire when it would be hit in a rear-end collision. And so the Germans scream, and they slam on the brakes, and the Jeep that they're in, or whatever it is, comes to a screeching halt, like, a quarter of an inch from this Pinto, and then it touches it at 0 miles an hour, and there's a little sound effect, ting, and then there's this huge fireball. Yeah, that's right. And so, I'm like, I posted the link to that scene. I'm like, oh, it was like this, right? And so then from then on, they called me Pinto, and it's still referred to as the Pinto incident. So
Pinto incident.
I like that. That's pretty good.
I swear one of these days I will share a story where I do something cool in the jet rather than something embarrassing. That's one of these days. But anyway, call signs are fun. It is a fun part of it. Even to the extent where I have really good personal friends, that I can't help but call them by their call signs. I know their real names. I've met them in real life, but I refer to them by their call signs. It's just kind of part of the fun of the thing.
Yeah, and for me, the alternate call sign, that was kind of a rite of passage. I mean, when somebody does that for you, unless they're calling you something you don't like, then, that kind of like saying, hey, you're part of the group. So that's the way I took it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I tell you what, that I think maybe that is the great place to shut it down, because what we can do is we can say, well, we welcomed Derk and Schnidrman to the show, and what we can do here at the end is thank Derk and Twister for being on and sharing their stories and their experiences with IQT, and just kind of letting us get to know them a little bit better. So how does that sound to you guys?
Yeah. I'll point out real quick also on our website on the 440thvfw.com, we have a public link that's there, and inside that public link, if you drill into it, you can see the cadet flight reports, and so anybody can go in there and just look over them and kind of get an idea of what's going on. There's some pictures and some basic write-ups on our IQT stuff. I kind of find it fascinating. I was in just looking at it recently, and see if I can pull it up real quick. The one, and I think it's Schneiderman's post that he has. It's been in there for a couple months now, but it's got 800 hits or so, 700 hits with people looking at it. So it gets some attention. At least it's something that shows what we're doing on the training side of things.
Yeah, it's great to point that out. We do that, of course, for every student. And I think it's one of the cool things about it to me is always, we have students come on and the IQT happens, and then the instructor after every mission says, here's how it went, and you get the guys saying, hey, great job, awesome to see that. It's just, I don't know, I feel like that is kind of captures the feel that we're going for, and I think that we achieve. So that's always nice to see.
It builds the community with the wingmen or the other wing members making comments on the different IQTs. They've all been through it, so they welcome them in that way, and normally, if it's just the IP and the cadet, you only see each other flying, and you think, well, maybe this is a two-person wing, but it's not. When you see these posts in there, you can see that there are more around, and they're watching the progress going through.
Yeah.
And I'll also add that the IPs really do a good job of picking out good pictures and making the student look pretty good, and they don't beat you up on these cadet reports or anything. I mean, they make you look pretty like you know what you're doing, even if you're having a little struggle there. I mean, it's all in good fun, and nobody's there to beat you up, or and nobody enjoys, at least here, watching some guy go down in flames. I mean, nobody wants to see a guy drop out of IQT, and from what I've seen, these guys are working real hard to make sure that even if a guy's struggling, they, get the help they need to get through it, and if they just can't do it, or, it's just too much for them, that's their decision to make. But I feel like the IPs are here to help you out, and, if you gotta take a break and come back later, that's something that they give the option to do, but it's never like, oh, you can't do this.
Yep.
Nobody's ever given me that kind of vibe here that they're just, looking to get rid of you or something like that. If you're struggling, they're there to help you. And actually, if Derk wants to talk about it a little bit, he's got kind of a plan for that he's working on, and I'm kind of helping him out with that too.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll probably table that one for another time.
Absolutely.
But as far as the IPs go, and I know with the cadets, at the end of the day, this is entertainment. We're having fun, so we shouldn't be pushing so hard that any of it gets stressed where we're not having fun. There's a stress to do something to complete and accomplish it, so that you can have the fun of doing that and having the accomplishment. But there's never any push something's got to be done and has to be done in a certain way. It's just try to enjoy it as we go through and have a little bit of fun here and there.
Totally. Well, Derk, you mentioned www.440thvfw.com. People can go and check out the wing there. They can register, post on the forum to say hi, or send a PM if they're interested. That's a private message, in case you don't know, to either Derk or Zeus or me, Tyrant. Any which way you want to get hold of us, we'd be happy to talk to you. Certainly would love for you at least to come by and have a look. Like Derk said, those cadet reports are certainly one place to start, but there's other things to look at as well. Certainly would love to have you there. Always looking for more people to fly with us, and we're going to be providing opportunities for that to happen. So I think that's a good place to wrap up. Though, thanks again, Twister, and thanks again, Derk, for coming on. Really enjoyed having you guys on tonight. Yeah,
thanks for having me. I was glad to do it. It's my little way to pay back for all the time that these guys put in to help us out. And, the IQT, you never stop training. Me and Derk have gone up for a couple of just training flights so I can work on some of the things that I feel like, that he knows that I didn't get quite right in the IQT. But like I said before, there's a standard, but there's some wiggle room there. You don't have to do everything perfect. If you show you know what you're doing, you're going to get through IQT.
All right. Well, I couldn't put it better myself, and so but I think that's a good place to stop. So we'll say good night. This has been the 440th VFW Podcast. Thanks.
Thanks, Tyrant.
Thanks. Good night.